I sat at the plaintiff's table and wondered, not for the first time, how a marriage could end up here. 3 years earlier, my husband had been the loudest person in every room. He was charming, confident, and somehow convinced everyone that he was always right. Back then, I thought his confidence was attractive. I thought it meant he would protect me, support me, and stand beside me through anything. Instead, I was watching him point at me in a courtroom and call me a liar. The divorce had already dragged on for months. Every hearing seemed to introduce a new accusation. According to him, I was manipulative. I was dishonest. I exaggerated everything. If something bad happened in our marriage, somehow it became my fault. But this accusation was different. This one hurt. He stood confidently before the judge and adjusted his expensive suit jacket. The performance was clearly rehearsed. He had probably practiced it in front of a mirror. "Your Honor," he said dramatically, "my wife built our entire marriage on a lie." A few people in the gallery leaned forward. He loved an audience. "Years ago, before we got married, I had discovered I was pregnant. It had been one of the most emotional moments of my life. I was scared, excited, and completely overwhelmed. We had gone together to a military hospital because I was stationed on base at the time. Now he was claiming the whole thing had never happened. He shook his head sadly, pretending to be the victim. "She told me she was pregnant. She said a doctor confirmed it. But there was never any proof. Not one piece of evidence." I stared at him in disbelief. Not one piece of evidence? I wanted to laugh. Or scream. I hadn't decided which. He continued speaking. "I was pressured into a marriage based on a story that was never verified." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Are you claiming there was no medical examination?" "Exactly, Your Honor." His confidence filled the room. He spoke as though he had uncovered some grand conspiracy. I glanced toward his attorney. Even the attorney looked slightly uncomfortable. Because everyone in that room knew there was a difference between presenting facts and rewriting history. The worst part wasn't the accusation itself. It was how easily he said it. As though one of the most personal moments of our lives meant absolutely nothing. As though the years we spent together could simply be rewritten because it benefited him. The courtroom remained silent as he finished his speech. Then he smiled. It was the smile of someone who thought he had already won. "Without proof," he concluded, "this entire story falls apart." For a moment nobody said anything. Then the courtroom doors opened. I turned instinctively. An elderly man entered carrying a worn leather briefcase. His gray hair was neatly combed. His posture remained surprisingly straight despite his age. There was something immediately familiar about him. Then I recognized him. My eyes widened. No way. After all these years? The retired military doctor walked calmly toward the witness stand. The same doctor who had examined me years ago. The same doctor who had been present during one of the most memorable appointments of my life. And judging by the sudden loss of color in my husband's face, he recognized him too. For the first time all morning, my husband's confidence disappeared. His smile vanished. His shoulders stiffened. The doctor gave me a small nod of recognition before taking his seat. Then he looked directly at my husband. A faint smile appeared on his face. It wasn't a cruel smile. It was the smile of a man who remembered something very, very funny. The clerk swore him in. My husband swallowed hard. And suddenly I had a feeling this hearing was about to become a lot more entertaining than anyone expected. The retired military doctor adjusted his glasses and settled comfortably into the witness chair. Unlike my husband, he wasn't performing. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He simply looked like a man who had spent decades telling the truth and expected everyone else to do the same. "Doctor," my attorney began, "did you have occasion to examine the plaintiff approximately 12 years ago at Fort Hawthorne Medical Center?" "I did." His answer came instantly. "And do you recall the circumstances?" The doctor smiled. "Oh, very clearly." A strange ripple moved through the courtroom. Even the judge seemed curious. My husband's attorney stood. Objection. The witness is relying on memories from over a decade ago. The doctor calmly opened his briefcase. Actually, counsel, I'm relying on medical records. The smile disappeared from my husband's face. The doctor removed several folders. Military hospitals documented everything. Every examination. Every test. Every patient visit. The judge reviewed the documents for several moments. Then he nodded. The records appear authentic. My husband shifted uncomfortably in his chair. For the first time that morning, he wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the folders. The doctor continued. To answer the court's question, yes. The plaintiff was examined at our facility. Multiple tests confirmed the pregnancy. A silence filled the room. The kind of silence that follows a devastating punch. My husband blinked. His entire argument had just collapsed in one sentence. My attorney nodded. So there was medical proof? There was extensive medical proof. A few spectators exchanged looks. The judge made several notes. My husband suddenly leaned forward. There has to be some mistake. The doctor looked at him. No mistake. I don't remember that. The doctor chuckled softly. Mr. Reynolds, with respect, I find that difficult to believe. A few people laughed. The judge immediately restored order. My attorney smiled. Doctor, is there any particular reason you remember this examination so clearly after all these years? The doctor's expression changed. For the first time, he looked genuinely amused. Oh yes. My husband visibly tensed. The doctor folded his hands. You see, most examinations are routine. They blend together after enough years. He glanced toward my husband. But some become unforgettable. The courtroom leaned in. Even I felt excitement building. I already knew where this was going. My husband probably knew too. Unfortunately for him, everyone else was about to find out. The doctor continued. The plaintiff handled the appointment exceptionally well. Then he paused. Her husband did not. A burst of laughter escaped somewhere in the gallery. My husband turned red. The doctor maintained a perfectly straight face. Mr. Reynolds attended the examination. He arrived in excellent spirits. The doctor looked toward the judge. He spent approximately 15 minutes explaining to our staff how tough he was. The laughter grew louder. My husband sank lower into his chair. The doctor continued. He informed several nurses that nothing made him nervous. The judge coughed suspiciously into his hand. I suspected he was hiding a smile. The doctor nodded thoughtfully. He specifically mentioned that hospitals didn't bother him. A few more chuckles spread through the room. My husband closed his eyes. The doctor wasn't finished. Then we began discussing routine pregnancy procedures. The witness stand suddenly felt like the stage of a comedy show. The doctor demonstrated with one hand. Mr. Reynolds turned pale. Several people laughed. He swayed slightly. More laughter. Then he fainted. The courtroom erupted. The judge immediately banged his gavel. Order! It took nearly 30 seconds for the laughter to settle. The doctor continued calmly. He fell directly into a tray of instruments. The laughter exploded again. I pressed my lips together to stop myself from joining in. The doctor shook his head. The crash was impressive. Even the judge was smiling now. How impressive? My attorney asked. The doctor replied without hesitation. 3 nurses came running because they thought a cabinet had fallen over. The courtroom completely lost it. My husband looked as though he wanted the floor to open beneath him. The doctor glanced toward him sympathetically. I should also mention that he regained consciousness by asking if anyone saw what happened. More laughter. Then the doctor smiled. And that's not even the most memorable part. My husband's eyes widened in horror. Because he knew exactly what the doctor was about to say next. The doctor waited patiently while the courtroom settled down again. My husband looked absolutely miserable. The confident man who had entered the courthouse that morning was gone. In his place sat someone desperately hoping the witness would stop talking. Unfortunately for him, The doctor had spent an entire career delivering unpleasant truths. "Doctor," my attorney said carefully, "what was the most memorable part?" The old physician opened his briefcase again. "Oh, that's easy." My stomach tightened because I knew exactly what he was reaching for. A thick envelope. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. My husband visibly panicked. "No," he muttered. The doctor pulled out several photographs. "Oh, yes." Even the judge leaned forward. The doctor handed the photos to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. For a moment, the judge simply stared. Then his lips twitched. Then he coughed. Then he removed his glasses and looked again. The courtroom became completely silent. Finally, the judge spoke. "These are authentic?" "They are." "And they were taken on the day of the examination?" "Immediately afterward." The judge nodded slowly. I knew what he was seeing. One photograph showed my husband unconscious on the clinic floor. Another showed two nurses checking on him while struggling not to laugh. A third captured him sitting in a wheelchair looking confused and embarrassed. The final photograph was the worst. His face was covered with adhesive monitoring pads while he pointed angrily at the camera. The courtroom exploded. People laughed so hard that several spectators wiped tears from their eyes. Even the judge had to hide a smile. My husband's attorney buried his face in his hands. Meanwhile, my husband looked as though he wanted to launch himself through the nearest window. The doctor waited for the laughter to fade. Then he delivered the final blow. "What makes this especially memorable is that Mr. Reynolds spent 20 minutes before the appointment explaining how fearless he was." More laughter. The doctor nodded thoughtfully. "He informed our staff that he had never fainted in his life." The laughter intensified. "He also informed everyone that pain didn't affect him." At this point, even I couldn't stop smiling. The doctor shook his head. "Then he fainted before a single procedure occurred." The courtroom completely lost control again. As the laughter echoed around the room, I found myself drifting back to those years. Back to when we were young. Back to when I genuinely loved him. Despite everything that had happened, there had once been good moments. I remembered holding his hand in that hospital. I remembered his excitement when we first learned I was pregnant. I remembered believing we would spend the rest of our lives together. That was what made today so painful. Not the divorce. Not the accusations. The fact that someone I once trusted completely was willing to rewrite our history just to win an argument. The doctor seemed to understand. His voice softened. "The plaintiff was courageous throughout the entire appointment." The room became quieter. "She asked thoughtful questions. She remained calm. She conducted herself with maturity." I felt unexpectedly emotional. Because after months of being portrayed as dishonest and manipulative, someone was finally telling the truth. The doctor continued. "Frankly, she handled the situation better than most patients." The judge nodded. My husband stared at the table. He no longer looked angry. He looked defeated. The photographs had done more than embarrass him. They had destroyed the image he had spent months building. The fearless victim. The deceived husband. The innocent man supposedly trapped by lies. Now everyone could see the reality. He wasn't exposing a fraud. He was denying facts that were sitting in official records. The judge glanced at the photos one final time. Then he looked directly at my husband. The disappointment on his face was obvious. For the first time during the entire hearing, my ex-husband had nothing to say. No dramatic speech. No clever explanation. No accusation. Just silence. And as I watched him sit there, I realized something important. The courtroom wasn't laughing because he had fainted years ago. People faint all the time. They were laughing because he had spent years pretending to be something he wasn't. And now the truth had finally caught up with him. The worst part for him wasn't that the photographs existed. It was that every single person in that courtroom believed the doctor. And not a single person believed him anymore. The remainder of the hearing moved surprisingly fast. Once the medical records had been verified and the doctor's testimony was entered into the record, there wasn't much left for my husband to argue. Every accusation he had built his case around had collapsed. The pregnancy had been real. The examination had happened. The records existed. And unfortunately for him, so did the photographs. The judge spent several minutes reviewing the evidence before finally setting the documents aside. The room became quiet. My husband sat stiffly in his chair. For the first time since the divorce proceedings had begun, he looked genuinely nervous. The judge folded his hands. The court finds the testimony of the witness highly credible. My husband's shoulders slumped. The medical documentation clearly supports the plaintiff's account. Another blow. The allegations that she fabricated the pregnancy are unsupported by the evidence presented. That was the end of it. Months of accusations. Months of attempts to paint me as dishonest. Gone in a few sentences. I felt something inside me relax. Not because I had won. Not because my ex-husband had lost. But because the truth had finally been acknowledged. The judge wasn't finished. He looked directly at my husband. I would strongly advise greater accuracy in future testimony. Several spectators exchanged amused glances. Everyone understood exactly what the judge meant. The hearing ended shortly afterward. People began gathering their belongings. The retired military doctor stopped beside me before leaving. "Good to see you again." I smiled. "You too." He chuckled. "I honestly thought those photographs would never be useful." I laughed. Apparently today was their day. The old doctor grinned and walked away. As I stepped outside the courthouse, sunlight hit my face. For the first time in a long while, I felt free. The stress, the anger, the endless arguments. They suddenly felt much lighter. Someone was waiting near the courthouse steps holding 2 cups of coffee. The sight immediately made me smile. Ethan, a former military logistics officer I'd met the previous year through mutual friends. He wasn't loud. He wasn't arrogant. He didn't need to be the center of attention. He was simply kind. The kind of man who listened when people spoke. The kind of man who showed up when he said he would. The kind of man who never felt the need to pretend. He handed me a coffee. "How'd it go?" I stared at him for a moment. Then I started laughing. Not a polite laugh. A full, uncontrollable laugh. He raised an eyebrow. "That good? You have no idea." As we walked toward the parking lot, I told him everything. The testimony. The medical records. The fainting. The instrument tray. The photographs. By the time I reached the final picture, Ethan had stopped walking because he was laughing too hard. "No way. Way. The judge saw the photos? Every single one." He nearly dropped his coffee. For several minutes we stood there laughing together. And in that moment, I realized how different healthy love felt. There was no manipulation. No performance. No constant competition over who was right. Just honesty. Just peace. Just 2 people enjoying life together. A few weeks later, news of the hearing had spread through old military circles. Apparently several former nurses still remembered the incident. The story returned to legendary status almost overnight. People who hadn't spoken in years were suddenly calling each other. "Remember the guy who fainted during the pregnancy appointment?" Everyone remembered. Nobody forgot. Especially after the photographs resurfaced. As for my ex-husband, he eventually stopped making accusations. There wasn't much point anymore. The evidence had spoken for itself. The truth had won. And every time I thought about that courtroom, I couldn't help smiling. Not because he fainted. People faint. It happens. No, the funny part was that he had marched into court absolutely convinced he was about to expose a lie. Instead, he accidentally reminded an entire military hospital of the most embarrassing day of his life. Years later, whenever friends ask me about the strangest moment of my divorce, I tell them the same thing. My ex-husband went to court determined to prove he was the toughest person in the room. Instead, he discovered that his greatest enemy wasn't me, the judge, or even the military doctor. It was a tray of medical instruments. And once again, the tray won.